This morning I'm working on getting the rivet and the threaded section for the thumb screw all down to size. I want these to be 1/4 inch. I'm just a little bit bigger than that right now. So I'm going to do a little bit more filing. Then I'm going to cut what will be the rivet for our wing dividers off. And after that we'll go to the forge and we'll forge the thumb screw. And of course we are working on a pair of wing dividers or wing compass for the 150mm challenge. Now, if you didn't watch the previous video, I strongly encourage you to go back and watch that video. I'll put a link right up here so you can find it. But the 150mm challenge is an idea that comes from Hereford College in England. They have a very strong blacksmithing school. Great program if you're in that part of the world and want to check it out. What the challenge is to take a piece of 20mm by 20mm square bar that is 150mm long. Now for those of us in the US, that's 3/4 by 3/4 by 6 inches long, and make anything you want out of it, but it all has to come out of that one piece of square bar and you can't add any extra material. Now I decided to make a compass or a pair of dividers out of that, and they're going to be something similar to these. These are not a set I made. This is a set made by Mr. Peter Ross, who is phenomenal at this kind of work. But I'm using these kind of as my guideline for what sizes I want things to be and what the proportions are. I'm not actually trying to copy this compass in this project. In the previous video, we went ahead and roughed out the component parts. Like I say, everything has to come from this one bar. So we had to make sure we had material set aside for the thumb screw. We had to have material set aside for the wing, for the rivet, for a pin that holds the wing in, and then the 2 legs. So the first thing we did is we drew out a piece on the end of the bar that will be the pin to hold the wing in, our rivet, and our thumb screw. These are all just roughed out. The pin and the rivet are ready to go. I can just set those aside. We don't need those until we're ready to assemble the compass. This will be the thumb screw, and we'll forge that to shape today and maybe get the threads cut so it's completely done. This piece will be the wing, and we might get it shaped today. And then the legs. And we have 2 legs, and the heads are just roughed in. These are going to stretch out and draw out to a point, much like some of these older compasses. They'll get longer and thinner, and will probably at least double in length. This is going to be a pretty good size set of compasses, I think. So what do you say we get to work on part 2 of making our set of wing dividers or wing compasses? Now the shoulder on what's going to become the thumb screw isn't real crisp and clean, and it probably doesn't matter because you're never going to bury that right up to the shoulder anyways, but I think it would look better. So I'm going to put it in a heading tool, and I'm just going to drive that down, and that'll clean that shoulder up a little bit. You could use a monkey tool if that's what you have. Really not much difference. That's really all I need to do with that. And we'll turn that around and we'll form the thumb part of the thumb screw. Now this isn't perfectly round, so I'm going to put the long side down so that it stretches this way a little bit easier. These are full face blows up on the anvil, not half face blows. We aren't trying to create any kind of a shoulder. Now I'm going to fuller in with the guillotine tool about the halfway point of the knob. That'll just make something that's more comfortable to grab later. And that will get finished with a file. So that's not the absolute final shape, but you can see how it's very close to what we want for a thumb screw. Sky's the limit. You can do anything you want with these. You can make hearts out of them, butterfly wings, just a simple little flat like this. I just don't think this project needs any real embellishment on this. I think it needs to be clean and well done, but not fancy. But you can make that look like anything you want it to if you're making a similar project to this. Next, I was going to do the wing, the part the divider leg locks down on to keep it from moving when you're using it. But I decided I'd rather get the holes punched in the legs of the divider so I know what the radius of that wing is before I start to forge it. Otherwise, I'm just guessing. So we're going to wait and do that almost last. That means the next thing to do is to forge out the 2 legs. I have a small assortment of antique compasses and dividers, as well as the ones that Peter Ross has made. Some of them have square legs, some of them have half round legs, and some of them have triangular legs. And while I really like the triangular legs, I don't have a swedge to forge that down into that's real handy to use for this. So we're probably going to go with the square legs. If I change my mind and just can't stand it and got to go to the triangular legs, we'll probably do an extra video just to make the swedge. If not, we'll make a swedge like that some other time and maybe make another pair of dividers using more conventional stock sizes instead of starting with something way too big and then trying to work it down. I'm going to start just by making sure that that area right up next to the pivot point is nicely done. It's a little hard to hold on to right there. I just want to clean that up. Remember, we did this under the power hammer originally, and I just want it neatened up some. Another way we can do this is start from the far end, or hold the far end, and work over the hardy hole. I'm going for exactly 1/2 inch square here. Seems like a real nice size for this. And since this is kind of a metric project, that's pretty good. That's really more like 13 millimeters. So that's good for that end. And draw the rest of that out so it's a nice square bar, and then we'll start the taper. Again, I just want to take this down to a square bar. Then as I get more aggressive with it, we'll probably go to the horn of the anvil. And I might go ahead and do the other leg at the same time, so I'm sure they are the same length at this point. I'm just going to do the same thing with the second piece. Check my measurement. There will be lots of room for adjusting later. Typically you assemble these and then you file them till everything fits. Now we can compare this one to the first one and see if they're mostly the same cross section, so both the same square size, but also see if they're about the same length. It's easy to trim them, but it's harder after you draw it out to change the size up here. This one actually looks a little thicker still, so we'll take another heat and thin it out. I figure we saw almost all of part 1 under the power hammer, so I thought we would do most of part 2 at the anvil. I think that looks better. Yep, I think I'm pretty happy with those. So the next thing we want to do is draw out from wherever our wing is going to insert. And I think I'll put a center punch mark so I know what random point I've decided on. I don't think this is super critical unless you make a lot of them and you want them to all match. I think I'm going to go to 3.5 inches. This center punch mark just marks where I want to draw out to. But from the punch mark up to the head, I'm going to leave it untouched. I'm going to forge this just a little bit rectangular through here so that when the two legs are laying next to each other, it is more of a square down here at the tip. We'll just clean that taper up. If you had a 60-degree V-swedge and wanted the triangular leg, you would work this down into that swedge at this stage of the game. And if you aren't working under the restriction of doing it all out of one bar, before you get this drawn out, you can also forge weld a little piece of tool steel, and they'll be a little bit more long-lasting, a little bit more useful. But without the tool steel, they still work fine for leatherworking and woodworking. I'm not really doing any forging at this point. This is just cleaning up the little lumps and smoothing it out a little bit. So that's what we want both legs to look like. Currently we're at about 10.5 inches. So we've drawn out considerably, and they're bigger than the sample set I've been looking at, but not by much. So they're going to be very close to this size. So this is our wing, and we need to make a slot in each leg to accommodate this. One leg, the slot will need to be fairly tight because this is fixed and you don't want it to be wiggly when it's in use. And the other leg, it needs to be a clearance hole. So what I have is I've got a slot punch that's just a hair smaller than what this is, and that's what I'll create the holes with. And I have a drift that's tapered. So I will drift the fixed leg, just a little bit of the drift up into here, and then the other one I'll drift further, and that'll provide our clearance so that the wing will function. And there may need to be some filing before we're all done. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of consistency in my old ones on which side the fixed wing goes on and which side the loose leg goes on. So this will be the double leaf side, and I'm going to make it the fixed one, I think. I'm going to get that hot again and finish it. Then when I finish, I'm going to go over this U-shaped piece of square bar, and I'll be able to drift through there a little bit easier. It looks like that's all the way through. Before I bother to drift it, let's see if this fits. Now that fits just fine, so I'm not even going to bother to drift that. And we can either leave it bulged out or we can forge it back down. I kind of like it a little bit fatter myself, so I think I'm going to leave it. So that's all we're going to do with that leg for right now. I start this on the inside, so if I'm off a little and I have to fix it and leave some sort of a little gouge, it'll be where the legs are closed together, as opposed to on the outside where you'll see it. I'm going to drive this through just a little bit further this time, because this one does need to be big enough for a sliding fit on this leg. That fits pretty good. I think I'm going to drift it anyways just to be really sure. But it certainly doesn't need much drifting. To a large extent, it's just to kind of clean up my hole here. I don't want to flatten the bulge out completely, just enough to center it again, and then I'll make the other side match it. Got that down in the hardy hole, so I'm not actually messing with that swell out area there. That's pretty good. And this should now fit very nicely through there, which it does. Now remember, in use, this actually has to inscribe an arc, so we might have to make that a little bit bigger to get it to run smoothly, but we'll wait till we get to the assembly phase. So because I flattened this slot punch out a little bit, I'm going to do the same thing to this one, but just enough to make them look like they belong together. I don't want to put my drift in very deep. I really don't want to enlarge this slot. So just enough to hold it. And work it down again. I'm down in the Pritchell hole, so everything stays even and centered. And in an ideal world then, this shouldn't go all the way through. Yeah, it's going to be fairly loose, so we're going to have to do some work on that when we're all done. But there are ways to fix that. Well, I just got back from a lunch break and a 15-minute power nap, and I'll bet you didn't even know I was gone. But anyways, now I can take a little closer look at our divider halves now that they've cooled off some. And I'm really pretty happy in general with the shape. They're really rough, going to need a lot more work, but we're still in the rough forging stages. The next thing we need to do is create the pivot point, the 3-leaf joint that will allow these to function smoothly. Now that means that one of these is going to need to be split, and that will be the larger one. Now I know the machinists out there thinking, well, I just run a mill through there. Some of you are thinking, well, I can cut that with an angle grinder and a cutoff disc. I could use a bandsaw. There are a lot of ways you could do this, but remember, people were making dividers like this for hundreds of years before any of that equipment was available, so you don't need that to do this. We're going to do it with a chisel. This other side, you'll notice that it's too small, it doesn't fit, but it needs to be thinned. So we're going to have to create a shoulder right across here on both sides evenly, and then draw this out until it's about the same diameter as that head. So let's do this one first. So to do this, I want to try and create the shoulder between the edge of the hammer and the edge of the anvil. You could do this in a guillotine tool or set it up some other way. If you're really careful, you can do it right here and you don't need any special tools. And there will be some filing when you're all done, so don't worry about it if it isn't perfect. I'm going to spread that some with the cross peen to make sure it gets big enough. So I've ended up with a better shoulder on that side than I did the other side. So I'm going to do a little half-face blow just to recenter that up. So that kind of gives you the idea. That's now as big as this one is. We're just going to have to make them fit. You do need to get this thin enough. It's better to trim it than to leave it too thick. So that looks pretty good. Something a little under 1/4 of an inch should be about right for what I'm doing. Now we need to split the other one. So this has to be able to insert inside this other piece. And for that, I think we'll just put it in the vise, and we will use a chisel to split that down. Because of this knob that forms the joint, it's not going to slip in the vise, so this should be a very accurate way to work on this. Like any other splitting operation or punching operation, check your positioning frequently when you start to make sure you're really going center. This will take a few heats. Yeah, I know my hand is in your way, isn't it? There is a way to forge weld up this entire leg of the compass so that you forge half of this leaf on one end and half on the other, fold it in half, then you draw the point out. And someday we'll show how to do that. So just take your time and you'll get there. Now if your chisel is made out of something that won't put up with being in the heat too much, cool it regularly. This one is H13 and it doesn't mind this. Just so I can work this from a different angle, a different perspective, I'm going to do some of it at the anvil. This is certainly an option. If you get close to the anvil, make sure you put a cutting plate in. Got one side that's a little thicker, so I'm trying to steer my cut to move it over a little bit. There's going to need to be a little bit of filing inside this, but not too much. A lot of this is done by forging. But trying to even the cut out, I've ended up with some rag in there, and we'll need to make sure we file that out. One more heat and we got to have that split. I've got a mild steel insert, so if my chisel hits it, it's not going to hurt anything. So that's pretty good the way that is. I want to create a flat bottom in there so that the other leaf fits. And to do that, I'm just going to use a flat bottom punch. Create a nice flat bottom. This is going to take a lot of straightening out. It took a lot of abuse doing this. So that's horribly deformed and crooked and just looks like garbage in general. And that's okay. I kind of expect it. I'm just using a little spacer that's actually a little drift. Now, this will take a lot of work, but most of it will happen in conjunction with the other piece because we need to make them fit each other. Like I say, I'm going to do a little bit of filing on this before we get too far with it. But that gives you the idea of how we created our two-leaf side of our three-leaf divider. And then this side will insert into there. And of course they don't even come close right now. And that's okay, that's exactly what I expect. While the legs cool off, let's take a few minutes and work on the little thumb screw just to get it done so we don't have to worry about it later. Now the shape of this thumb screw is just up to whatever it is you want. Every single pair of dividers I have has a different thumb screw in it. And I think just a simple oval is all I really want. Of course, that little round stud doesn't really fit the vise or hold in the vise very well. Now with the profile all shaped on this, I want to kind of hollow it out here so that it is comfortable to turn and so that it's all even and get all the hammer marks out. I'm going to finish this off to a file finish with no hammer marks left, ideally. And a half round file is the tool of choice for this. And this just doesn't take long at all. You hear the noise in the background, that's the Air Force out training. For some reason, our little town is a popular place to practice flying over the mountains. That's really all there is to that. Just do the other side the same. So our final step is to thread the screw portion. Make sure you take all the forge scale off first and your threading dies will last longer. And to keep from scratching up all my file work I've just done, I'm going to use a leather pad in the vise here. This also helps it grip a little bit better. And I'm going to do this with a fine thread because we won't have much room in the leg of the divider to get a real deep threaded hole in the leg. So the fine thread means we'll engage more threads. So in this case it's a 1/4 by 28 thread. So cold in here the oil barely comes out of the oil can. And as you cut threads, remember to back up a little bit every now and then to break the chips off. And really about 1/4 inch of threads is all this absolutely has to have, but I'm going to go all the way up to the base here. Just to make sure it's plenty and works right. I can always trim the screw shorter if I need to. No reason to have a whole lot of extra length on it. It just sticks out further. So that's a thumb screw. Pretty much finished. I might clean it up a little bit with some finer abrasives to get rid of some of the file marks in there, but otherwise that's done. Now our divider legs have cooled off. And like I say, they don't even think about going together right. They're pretty terrible at this point. So I'm just going to file this cleaner inside. I'm not worried about sizing it and filing these to a precise fit. The file is just to get rid of any lumps, bumps, and because there's some ragged areas in here from readjusting my chisel cut, I need to get rid of those. That's really all I need to worry about initially. Just try to get a flat file that'll fit in there. And again, you're not trying to fit these by filing. You're just trying to get rid of the obstacles to making them fit by forging. And that'll probably make more sense when we get to the forging portion of it. I think that's pretty darn good. Next thing I want to do is clean up these shoulders just a little bit. This is the easy one to file. Now this fit is still just absolutely awful, but it is exactly where we want to be at this stage of the game. Next thing we want to do is we want to get this piece hot, the 2-leaf piece we want to bring up to heat. Now I'm just going to put that down on there, grab both legs with my tongs if I can, and forge these together. And we'll make them fit. We'll make them be happy together. That looks a lot better. After that initial fit, we can heat them up together. We want to check our slots and make sure they line up, which they do not quite perfectly line up. So we might have to draw out the one that doesn't quite line up right. And there's definitely going to be more filing to go here. Matter of fact, there's a lot of filing at the end on something like this if you want them to be pretty. Okay, by drawing that out, our slots are a little bit more in line. I think I'll heat it up one more time and do just a little bit more. And then we're pretty much down to the final filing stage. I'm going to pull this one leg down a little bit. Now remember, I've got a swollen part here for the slot that I don't want to squish. So if I'm working this, I want to work that off the edge of the anvil. And that way it doesn't get damaged. In general, I am pretty happy with that right now. Next, we let it cool, and then we go back to a whole lot of filing. Well, I think I'm going to let that cool and then take a look at it and see what we need to do to file it and make the action work smooth. and a bunch of other little fiddly things to actually make this now into a pair of functioning dividers. And that will be part 3 of this series on making a set of wing dividers or wing compasses. Split leaf version where I chisel it down and try to forge it to shape is something I haven't tried before. All the ones I've done before were forge welded. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll take a look at that process in another video. I just wanted to try this and see how it works. And with that heavy 3/4 inch bar that we started with, this seems to make a little more sense. Otherwise I would have had to draw the bar out, then fold it over and forge weld it back into a heavier bar. And that seemed like more work than we needed to go through. But in the final video, it will be mostly bench work. There will be filing, probably some grinding because that'll go a lot faster, and we will hopefully get this project completed in the next video. This is part of the 150mm challenge from Hereford College. I'll put a link down below to the Instagram hashtag 150mm challenge, and I'll put a link down below also to Hereford College so you can go check them out if you want to, and maybe some other useful links for the challenge project. And again, you don't have to make dividers, you make anything you want. Most of the pieces are simply more artistic than they are tools, so there's no requirement whatsoever. And this can be a challenge that you just do for yourself, and you don't really even have to share it with anybody, but it is more fun if you share. I do hope you found this video interesting and educational. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, I would love it if you hit that subscribe button. Take some time, watch a few of the other videos, share the videos with your friends. Make time in your day to get out to your shop, make something, but do stay safe. Wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next one. If you would like to provide financial support for Black Bear Forge and the videos we are producing here on YouTube, there are links down in the description for donations. Those are merely donations. The content is free and will remain free.